The Bliss Business Podcast, the show about empathy, connection, and consciousness in business. Today's episode is brought to you by Zero Company, your paid search, social media, and programmatic ad experts.
Welcome back to the Bliss Business Podcast series, Scaling with Purpose. These are our short 10-15 minutes podcast series where we explore how to embed purpose into every level of your organization. I'm Steven Sakach here once again with Tullio, Siragusa, and Maher. Hey, guys.
Hello.
Let's do this.
Yeah, so today we're exploring supply chain and sustainability through a purpose lens, how to extend your organization's purpose to your supply chain, ensuring that vendors and partners align with your values and missions. Let's get started.
All right. Thanks, Steven. So in today's world, purpose-driven organizations can't stop at their own walls. It spreads across the entire supply chain. So for example, if you're a goods and services company, how you source your products, if it's aligned with your overall purpose, then you source your products as well as aligned with that purpose.
Exactly. And you know what? That's not always easy to do, but customers and stakeholders are increasingly demanding this kind of transparency and accountability. In fact, they want to know that the products they buy align with their values and are ethically and sustainably sourced. So it's not just enough to buy it from the vendor. They want to know the entire supply chain, right? They want the proof that the entire supply chain aligns with that purpose. So extending the purpose to the supply chain isn't just sort of the right thing to do. It's also a strategic advantage for business. So we should dive into that a little bit, why this matters too.
Yeah, I think, purpose-driven supply chain, it builds trust, really. When customers know that every aspect of your product, from its raw materials to packaging, aligns with your mission, it creates that authenticity, right? So this transparency deepens the customer loyalty, and it really does enhance the brand reputation when you do this right.
And Steve, it's not just about the marketing. I mean, it helps mitigate risks. When you're working with vendors and partners that align with your values, you're not so worried about issues that could come across when you're working with people that don't align with those values. So really, it's a mitigating risk tool as well.
It's also tied to driving long-term growth too. In fact, a study by Nielsen said that 73% of global consumers are willing to change their consumption habits to reduce environmental impact. So a purpose-driven supply chain in that environment would really resonate with conscious consumers and increase that brand loyalty and competitive advantage. So depending on what the purpose is, people align to it, it can increase the consumption and loyalty of those customers as well.
Yeah, and I think, purpose-driven supply chain is not just like a trend. It's just becoming more of a necessity. Customers want to buy from brands they trust, and that trust always brings with that transparency, right? And that accountability, and they're looking into your supply chains. So let's explore some actionable strategies here to building that purpose-driven supply chain. The first step is really, choosing those vendors and partners that align with your purpose if you can. So this means evaluating potential vendors and partners, not just on that cost or efficiency, which is maybe the first thing that you're trying to do, but also on their values and practices. And so what you need to do for this is develop some criteria for selecting vendors that align with your purpose, right? So this could include sustainability practices, ethical labor standards, community impact. And then what you want to do from that is kind of conduct audits to ensure that the vendors and partners uphold those ethical and sustainable practices. And this includes, reviewing the labor practices, the environmental impact, and, any sort of corporate social responsibility initiatives they're doing. Just need to be really thorough in your process here when you're vetting these different vendors and partners.
Patagonia, as an example, I mean, we always come back to this company. They select suppliers who meet strict environmental and social standards. They ensure every product reflects those standards. And literally their Footprint Chronicles tool even allows customers to trace the supply chain, demonstrating transparency and accountability with their community.
Real quick with Patagonia, they actually make really tough decisions. They're the decisions that they're like, we're going to lose money on this, but they just do it anyway. And a lot of times in the end, it's like, yeah, no, this was the right decision, not just ethically and aligning with their values, but they end up being more profitable because of that too. So they're they've gone through some of these really tough decisions like you're talking about there, Ash.
No, absolutely.
Footprint Chronicle. Try saying that really fast over and over. We love Patagonia. We don't make any money by mentioning them, by the way. We just love them. So in any case, it's really about partnership, isn't it? It's not just about fulfilling transaction. That's really what we're talking about. When vendors share your purpose, then they become co-creators with your brand story. And that is how you build a purpose-driven ecosystem where everyone is working towards the same mission. In essence, the vendors that work with Patagonia, they elevate those vendors by expecting them to be able to fulfill their purpose. So you create a movement, so to speak, and those partnerships are so key to your brand relationship. So how do you embed this kind of purpose into supply chain? That's the big question. And purpose-driven supply chains, they do require a lot of operational alignment and strategy and planning. This means that you got to integrate your purpose into your sourcing, into your production, and even in your distribution decisions. So a couple of ways to do that. One, let's talk about sustainable sourcing. In this case, you would have to prioritize raw materials that align with your mission. For example, if sustainability is your purpose, then you would choose renewable, recyclable, and biodegradable material to fulfill that purpose. Aligning with ethical production practices. Well, you would work with manufacturers who ensure fair wages and safe working conditions and actually are active in supporting their community. And then, of course, if one of the focus is to manage carbon footprint or reduce carbon footprint, then you would want to optimize your logistics to minimize the environmental impact, such as using green transportation methods, for example, or reducing package waste. So this does require quite a bit of planning and thought and strategy, but it's absolutely doable by being proactive.
Tullio, absolutely. And a company that does this really well, going back to a previous example, is Unilever. Their main purpose is sustainability in the commonplace. So they embed this into operations by ensuring all palm oil is sustainably sourced, working towards 100% recyclable packaging by 2025. So they've aligned their entire supply chain with their environmental purpose, which I think is phenomenal.
Yeah, it's really about being intentional with, every operational choice. This is when we talk about Bliss, build love into scalable systems. You're really trying to be intentional with every part of your business. And purpose isn't just a guiding principle. It's really an operational framework that drives consistent and meaningful impact. So the next thing let's look at building transparent and collaborative supply chains. So transparency here is really the key to building purpose-driven supply chains. Customers want to see where products come from and how they're made. So here's how you can start with building that transparency and collaboration. So there are supply chain transparency tools. You can use technology to provide visibility into your sourcing, production, into your logistics. There's blockchain, and there's different traceability platforms that can ensure that transparency and accountability. And then you want to be collaborative. You want to build long-term relationships with your suppliers and partners who share your values. So you're co-creating sustainability here and making initiatives together, and being very purposeful with purpose-driven projects that benefit communities and the environment. And then really, of course, you got to be open with all your customers in your communication. So share your supply chain story openly with customers. If you're trying real hard at this and doing a good job, they're going to give you feedback and they're going to give you some leeway. And, if you're responsive to that, you can really be effective with that communication. So, whether you're doing that through digital platforms or your product labels or social campaigns, make sure you're communicating openly.
What a big change from even just years ago, where it was kind of like a black box. You don't know what went on in the back end, right? You just cared about the product, but it was also difficult to track and communicate. The technology wasn't there. But there are two examples of companies that do this extraordinarily well. Again, Patagonia and also Everlane. They have absolutely transparent supply chains. They provide detailed information about each step from sourcing to manufacturing. And so a customer can actually look at the entire supply chain, be informed about their decision, which is phenomenal because it's kind of like the proof is in the pudding. This is where it becomes a strategic advantage because they actually have complete visibility for anybody to see how everything is produced and distributed. And it's a feel-good thing for a consumer who cares about those things to say, I'm doing business with a company that cares about what I care about, and therefore I'm going to keep rewarding them for it.
Absolutely. And transparency is not just about showing the good things that are happening. It's about showing the challenges that you're dealing with, sharing that with your community. As long as you're aligned with the goals, your community will galvanize around that, right? They'll support around that, knowing that, hey, you guys are still working towards what we care about, whether it's even though it's currently a little bit imperfect. As long as you're still working on it and you're sharing that transparency with us, we appreciate it. One example of this, and it's a little bit controversial now, but let's just talk pre-politics. SpaceX and Tesla, for example. I know Elon was very famous at the time for vocalizing the challenges they'd run into. So that in community that was supportive of SpaceX and its mission, even though they were aware of challenges, if a rocket came down and fell on its head, people still supported the vision of interplanetary travel. So he did that really well. Again, a controversial example, but when you really look back on it, that was one where they would bring up the issues that would
Well, it's interesting. I mean, yeah, I think they're customers that were aligned value-wise and now aren't so much with that. And so you see some of this rift in it. So let's just cover, some of the measuring you can do on this, because we all, you got to need those metrics. If you're doing this right, you might be starting with like a triple bottom line or something to where you're really need some of these metrics. So look at the environmental impact metrics, measure your carbon emissions, water usage, the waste reduction through your supply chain. Look at your ethical sourcing metrics, track all your compliance with labor standards, the wages, fair wages, and your certifications for ethical sourcing. There's community impact metrics, so you can assess, your social impact initiatives and your partnerships and the contributions to local economies even. And then track, supply chain transparency and communication with all the stakeholders. So just make sure there's a lot of transparency and accountability in there. And again, this is like, if you want to do this right, you got to keep it kind of in front of everyone. So there may be creative metrics you can come up with on your own on how to do that.
Absolutely. And these metrics go beyond efficiency and cost. It's really measuring impact. By tracking purpose-driven metrics, organizations can hold themselves and their partners accountable to their overall mission. And that's just so important when you're trying to be a purpose-driven business.
And it's really important that the focus is about progress, not perfection. So as we had mentioned, if you have something that goes wrong, it's okay to talk about it as long as you're committed to this plan, because purpose-driven supply chains, it's an evolving journey and it's a continuous, track of how it's impacting everything, how you communicate openly. And the adaptation is needed because things change. Vendors may not necessarily meet the requirements anymore. Now you have to communicate that and you have to make a change, and it doesn't happen overnight. So it's about creating a purpose-driven ecosystem that benefits people, planet, and profit, and knowing that it's not going to be perfect out of gate. It may never be perfect, but it's the commitment to continuously make improvements to achieve that purpose that matters to most people.
Yeah, and it's a beautiful process. I mean, when purpose guides those supply chain decisions, it creates that consistency, that authenticity, and it really does, turn what you think of as vendors into partners, right? And it turns customers into advocates. So this is really what's going to drive that long-term growth and impact. In our next episode, we'll explore purpose-driven product development, diving into how purpose can inspire innovation and create products that resonate deeply with customers. This is really part of our story for sure. Don't forget to subscribe and share this podcast with others on their purpose-driven journey. We'll see you next time.